Greetings. This is Virtuous Roots, where we cultivate virtue to bring it to our home and yours. And I'm Thomas McCuddy.
I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And today we're going to talk about how do parents teach their children the importance of forgiveness. And so I know that forgiveness is something that we talk about on a regular basis, especially when we have multiple children in the home, because we always talk about having to forgive siblings and whatnot. And before we begin on how to teach it, I want to make sure that we understand the idea and the concept of forgiveness in the first place. So I'm gonna lead us off with a scripture, and it's Ephesians 4:31 through 32. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you.
Mm.
So, as far as forgiveness verses, we have many to choose from. That's my favorite.
Hmm.
So, can we talk about can we define what forgiveness is? Because I think there's a huge misconception, or at least multiple definitions.
That forgiveness is that canceling a debt. So we think of it in terms of when we go to God asking for forgiveness, He cancels the debt we owe. It is we talk about, well, it is if we've not even sinned, like it's gone. We even talk about this in why we use almost the monetary idea, like when if we have a debt, it gets canceled. So in forgiveness with people, we're kind of doing the same thing. That there's something that's been done to us. There's a debt that's owed, and in that forgiveness, we are from our hearts letting that go. Now, it doesn't mean that, again, if restitution doesn't necessarily happen, that somebody's done something wrong, they might need to fix what is wrong or to heal. There's steps that have to be taken. So from the forgiveness, though, like this is why we can forgive even our enemies who don't even ask. We can let that go. Of course, our enemies will not make any restitutions or try to make any of that right. But ideally, particularly within Christian relationships, when we from our heart let that go and forgive that, then it's going to change how we react. And that's
Mhm.
why when we don't forgive, we might say, "Oh, I forgave you," but then we still hold it against them. And that's the not forgiving.
I'm going to forgive, but I will not forget.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, and even the forgetting, we talk about forgiving and forgetting. That's one idea behind it. But there is an idea that even if I have forgiven something, like my children have done something wrong, I definitely don't forget it, because whatever's prompted them to do the wrong, I want to deal with that.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I can still forgive and say, okay, you're forgiven, but there's a restitution, there's a punishment, there's something, we need to deal with this. And so that's why it's not just, well, you didn't forget, so therefore you haven't forgiven. That's not exactly how that works.
Well, I don't think
And
it's exact. I don't think it's how it works at all. To be
right.
honest, I think, and so this. I mean, we could hopefully we get to how do we teach our children this and don't just debate forgiveness the whole time. But um, I think it's important for us to look at reality and truth and understand, who people are. And I would all about forgiving. But do you continue to put yourself into a place of vulnerability to where you can be hurt again? I mean, I think there's an element that in some instances you do. I think there's an element of prudence here, but then in other instances you don't. You would never put yourself into a position to be injured again or
Mhm.
so there's got to be an element of yes, a forgiveness is there. It's biblical. It's God commanded.
Yep.
But then what responsibility do we have for protection
Right. Well,
and protection of
And
ourselves and our family and
and I think that if you think about in a proper, when James says to count it all joy as we go through various trials, one of the trials we can go through is a interaction. Somebody offended you or did something wrong to you. It's a trial. God puts you through those so that not just to see what he knows what you're going to do, but for you to recognize where you stand spiritually in relation to this other person. And the idea of forgiving them, it's not just said, I'm gonna forgive them and just like act, we have a clean slate now. We're just gonna go on where our life's like it never happened. It's learning from it and gaining wisdom. I'm like, well, next time I'm gonna see the signs maybe earlier. Maybe we can stop this offense from happening at an earlier point, so we don't have to have this confrontation. And there's no offense at all. Like, I think that through our trials and through these kind of, because I have family members that just never forgave each other, and there's just years went by, and just constantly just bickering, and I'm like, what? Our lives are only so long on this earth, and we're being tested while we're on this earth by God. And I feel like if I don't forgive my brother, that I kind of failed that test. Like, and I haven't gained the wisdom that I can get through the act of forgiveness.
But let's make sure we're not forgiving for ourselves, but we're doing it out of just an element of obedience to
Yeah.
Him. And so it can't be just like what I get out of the
Yeah,
forgiveness.
exactly.
It's we've also got to make sure that as we forgive,
Hmm.
we're forgiving for the right reasons and the right heart, and it's out of an obedience to the commands that God has given
And I
us.
think that's with always with the relation from the verse you say is with how God has forgiven us.
Right.
So it's like you're going to forgive them because, well, I've been forgiven much myself from all the things that I've done wrong. Maybe I didn't do this particular thing, but I've done this particular thing and this particular thing and this particular thing, and God has forgiven me. So like, I'm in a place where I need to forgive this person. God is the example. Christ is the example. Well, now I'm going to forgive like He forgave me.
I think there is that element though that with all virtues, any good that you do, there is an element because you've done this good, you are better for it.
Hmm.
So there is that element. We don't forgive just because we feel so good when
Well,
we forgive.
I'm
Right.
not saying to ignore that, but that can't be the driving factor of
Right.
it. The driving
Right.
factor of forgiveness ought be God's command
Yeah.
Mhm.
because He said so. Now, everything He has said so in Scripture seemingly benefits us. Like if we do it, we're like, oh, holy cow, look at this. Maybe
Yeah.
not holy cow. That probably wasn't the right. But like, hey, if I fast, God told me to fast. I'm going to do that out of obedience. Oh, wow. Now all of a sudden science is saying fasting is really, really good for your body.
Yeah.
That it. And so I'm not trying to say that, but I'm
Right.
saying like we should do this because He said so. And then we just reap the benefits because we are trying to be obedient for it. So
Yeah.
I just want
Mhm.
to make sure I want to make sure I'm coming across right.
Right.
Because there's a true psychological good from forgiving, because that's no longer weighing on you, because that 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 relationship that's been severed is now it's weighing on you, regardless if you're in the right or the wrong, because that person, the reason that they offended you is because you probably cared about them in some way, and you cared about what they said or did because of who they are.
Yeah,
Somebody
but
else.
and I'm with you and I agree. But I have gone through some very difficult trials on this forgiveness. And if somebody came to me and said, "You're going to feel better," that's a psychological thing weighing on you. And if I tried to forgive because of that,
Well, yeah.
I absolutely would have
Well, that's
failed.
what I was getting to.
But
It was.
instead it is God has commanded you to forgive and you want to
Mhm.
walk in obedience to Him. You want to glorify Him in everything that you do. And so I would spend years praying for this particular forgiveness. And then I did. And then as soon as I forgave and tried to restore the relationship, I was reminded as to why I had to forgive in the first place. And I kept doing it. And yes, the end is much more freeing, but that can't
Yeah,
even
exactly.
begin to be a driving factor because if we try to do it for that reason, when it gets hard, we're probably going to walk away.
Yeah, and I want, because like I was thinking, if that was your primary motivation, like, yeah, is it actually true forgiveness? Can it be true forgiveness without having the object being God's commandment? Could it be possible? Like, can I actually forgive somebody for benefiting myself without, because that's what we do all the time. It's like, I want to lose weight, but if that's my object, I'm going to do it in very strange ways. I'll not eat. But if I want to have better health, which is a higher good, I might benefit from that by losing weight. You know what I'm saying? Like, the same thing is like we look to God and we ask, because of the way He forgave us, that's the criteria for us to forgive others.
Right.
And once we do that from that proper perspective, then we're going to reap the benefits of having the psychological, the weight lifted.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for the right reason, and it's true. It's like, now it's secure in God's hands. He's the one that, you know.
But I think all those things are wrapped up into one, kind of like for a concrete illustration, if you're looking to lose weight, which will help you be healthy, which will help you fit into better
Yeah.
clothes, those are three reasons that are all concurrent. They're all together.
Yeah.
So I think in the realm of forgiveness, that God has commanded us to forgive because we owe people forgiveness, because there's an element we can't even live if we are not a forgiving people. It's gonna be destructive to us.
Yep.
All those things are concurrent. So that's why I completely agree. Like if we imbalance that, I think there's also an element of, God has told me I'm supposed to do this, but if your heart really doesn't want to, you're going to have that
Yep.
conflict. And that's
Mhm.
why bringing all those things in together, recognizing that's what helps us. And the worse thing that you're having to forgive, the harder the situation, the more we need almost, I would say, the total package that's there. Because I've been in some of those hard places where,
Mhm.
part of me, I don't want to forgive. I know I'm supposed to forgive, but there's an element I'm also aware of. I have to let this go. This is not going to be good for me. All of those things come together, and I think it's part of that wrestling. So I think there's a strength there to
Yeah.
know that there's a unity behind these ideas. And as we're teaching children that's why I don't want to teach my children to forgive simply from a state of command and their heart isn't there.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't want to teach my children you
But your
should
heart, their heart. I mean, I guess this goes to a broader thing. Your heart will be there if your ultimate good is glorifying God. If your ultimate lesson is to live this life to honor Him,
Mhm.
that would be the thing that softens that heart. I'm speaking from my own experience. I mean, I literally went through counseling for this, and they're like, "Yeah, you should, forgive for yourself." Yet, no, I don't want to. I don't want to. I want to be mad. I want to. I want to. I want to be the victim. I want to do this thing. I get what you're saying, but I'm not trying to say ignore the benefits. But if the driving factor becomes what it does for me, then I think I've lost it, and I don't think I'll do it.
Right, and I'm not saying that's driving factor. I'm saying it's the total thing of what it is, that
Yeah.
it's all those pieces together. That's why if any one of those becomes a driving factor, you're out of balance at that point. There is that element of you will be better in the forgiving. And just like you said, like I said, I know what it's like to feel that. No, I like my unhappy little cloud.
Yeah.
But that's because of that disordered love. That goes back to God has commanded these things and I'm rebelling against him. I'm tapping into my own vices and I'm loving my misery
Mhm.
rather than my good. All of those pieces. And I think that's what I want to communicate to my children is that there's a totality to this forgiveness. It's much more than just forgiving for forgiveness sake. I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm saying this is the ways that we
No, forgiving
we
for
miss the
God's
boat.
sake. And I
Right.
think so. I mean, I don't know if we're going to
Well,
agree, but I think that reason should be the driving factor, and you're saying it should be a balance, and that's
well,
fine. I mean, the ultimate answer is we ought to forgive.
Mhm.
well, and
Mhm.
I like what you said earlier about when you were struggling with forgiveness and you prayed for it and you prayed for it and you prayed for it over a period of time. And I think that kind of takes the idea of doing it bit like what Thomas says and like like the idea of we're doing it for. I think it just kind of brings them together because as you're working through it, because that's what you're doing. You're praying. I'm having a hard time with this person or this situation. But I'm prayerfully going through weighing out those things in your life, like because that's what you're doing.
I mean, it's the same reason I stopped cursing,
Yep.
and not because I wanted to, but because
Because
it didn't honor God. The same reason I
yep.
quit punching people in the mouth is not because I didn't want to punch people in the mouth, because I'm going to be honest, it's kind of fun. But it was because I wanted to honor God. I know
Yeah.
this is probably not appropriate, but I mean, it is what it is. I became and strive to be the person
Yeah.
that I'm continually striving to be, but
Exactly.
only for Him, not because I want to. I kind of liked those
Yeah.
things. I like my sin. I
Mhm.
do. It's, most people do.
Well, I think the idea of forgiveness being commanded of us it's interesting because we don't naturally want to do that. Like we don't
No,
naturally want to forgive people. We just want to just beleaguer our just despair of this person's wrongdoing. I know people that in their 70s that still think back on something that happened to them as teenagers, and they haven't they just that's still lingering in
Sure.
their
Yeah.
and
That's what yeah, absolutely.
that's why I like what you were saying is like when you're praying and as prayerfully, and I think this is what we teach our children as well, like being intentional, because a lot of times I pray for my kids, either my wife or I, before bed, and you can intentionally pray with those thoughts in mind, like you know I just think that God grants you that ability to forgive at some
And
point.
so, well, absolutely,
Yeah,
100% has granted that ability. But
yeah,
that moves us into how do we teach our children?
hmm
I think the first way we don't teach our children is we have a conflict with someone, and then we, ensure that everybody knows we forgave them, and then we go and sit around our dinner table and badmouth the person to our spouse because our spouse is our sounding board, and as always, the children will see the hypocrisy.
yep,
And so I don't that's definitely not how we teach it.
exactly.
So again, we model it in our own life. I'm not, I can beat that drum on every single one of these shows, but the, after we model it, after we have carried it through and shown it, how do we actually teach this to our children? Because it is such a hard concept to grasp ourselves, and even more difficult with young children who are purely selfish by nature.
So I think part of this goes back to on that idea of justice that we're supposed to love God, we're supposed to love others, and then we love ourselves, a proper ordering of love. And when we love ourselves more than the other person, that makes forgiveness very hard
Hmm.
because we put ourselves first and our feelings. So when we're trying to teach this to our children, this idea of truly loving the neighbor, we're loving God, we're loving the neighbor. Forgiveness is going to be part of that. You're not going to forgive if those things are not in place. And so this is why it's not just changing the behavior. It's not just saying it and like I said, and stuffing it. Because I think this was my problem, is that I'm one who likes to stuff the emotions. I'm one
Mm,
who, oh, I'm not going to manifest any kind of problem, but have I really let that go? Have I really forgiven? I think that's the one way why when we talk about forgive and forget is because when you have forgiven and you've let go over time, somebody breaks something up, you're like, oh, I forgot about that
hmm
because you've let it go.
right.
There's a component to that, and I think that's what we need to model with our children, that forgiving, the joy of forgiving,
hmm
that we are living in obedience, but also most of the time when we're dealing with forgiveness, that there's been some component of anger because we've been wronged.
Hmm.
yeah,
And anger is one of those emotions that again we've got to show, we've got to let this go, that we've had our anger, we had our reaction, and we can grieve over what's been done. But this is why we're also living that forgiveness. We've been forgiven, we can forgive others, we can actually let that go and to show our kids what it looks like to let that go.
So I'm going to
hmm
read Proverbs 27:5-6, kind of piggybacking off of what you said. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. It's probably one of the more powerful verses that has impacted my life, and I want to
hmm
key in on the beginning of 6, which is faithful are the wounds of a friend. So you had talked about stuffing those emotions. That would be that hidden love, and kind of just taking it and never saying anything. There's an element of forgiveness, I believe, that is actually having open, loving communication where you don't stuff it. Because how do you truly forgive if there is no working through it with the other person? And I know we don't have to forgive always, like the other person doesn't have to ask for it, doesn't always have to ask. But if we're going to look at that, any type of restoration where we're going to not stuff it, there's got to be an element where we communicate effectively, but also lovingly and truthfully. So, would that play into when we actually teach that to our children?
So, and for right or for wrong, there's an element I learned many years ago when dealing with youth ministry, and a youth pastor was talking about. So let me get the story and then make the connection. Because what he did is he was having an argument with his wife, and some of the teenagers were there, and they were like, maybe we should go outside." And he's like, "No, I'm going to show you how to fight." And the whole point is that he and his wife were having a conflict, so they had begun in front of them, and so they finished it in front of them, showing how to resolve that
Mm-hmm.
conflict and how to forgive each other. So he wasn't like
Good,
throwing the gloves
good.
off
Woo!
and
Yeah.
going, you know.
He's like, all right, we're gonna fight this
So I said,
out.
let me
Hey,
get through the story.
For the future,
Let me
if
get-
those words come to my mouth, get everybody out. Nice.
Okay.
I'm joking.
So
I think.
in that way, I've taken that because with my children, there's been those times where, okay, mommy and daddy, we need our privacy to deal with something.
Mhm.
But then there's other times I'm trying to show my children, here's how you deal with the conflict.
Right,
Here's
yeah.
how you, when somebody's been wrong, here's how you forgive. They do need to see that to a certain degree. Now there is an element of prudence. There have been some times recently I've noticed, like my wife and I we would get into some sort of conflict. I'd look around, I was like, where'd the kids go? And they're all like back in my oldest son's room, and he had actually gathered them and got them out of the room just so we could have some time. He's like, y'all good? You know, so I was like, okay, it wasn't that bad, you know. And then there's other times they've sat through and we've sort of, even after we finish, and we're like, okay, we're good, we've forgiven, we've recognized the wrongs, and then even sharing that with the kids, like very explicit, like you know, mommy and daddy, we love each other, we forgive each other. This is what it looks like. We
Yep.
want you to see this so you can understand. So it's, we don't act it out, like it's not fake. We don't get into a fight, you know, theoretically, just so our kids can have a, you know, their conflicts happen
As these
naturally.
things happen in real life, yeah, they all
It
come up.
is. And taking advantage of those moments, those real life moments, I think those are the things, even if the conflict was not spectacular,
Mhm.
the kids are going to remember.
Yeah.
They're going to recognize this is how they lived, and it needs to become part of the lifestyle. And
You
I
know-
think when forgiveness becomes part of our living, and that's when our kids are really going to learn how to do that for themselves. They're going to see that from the living model.
So I think it's a good example, and I've been dealing with a lot of parents um, over the last 10 years or so, and I think one of the other ways that's incredibly important to teach this to our children is by forgiving our children.
Yeah.
I watch many parents take their anger, they get mad at their kids and they hold it against them,
Yep. Yeah,
and
that's good.
they get mad for days on end. And I can't imagine anything really that my kid could do that would make me angry for days.
Yeah.
Like I understand that punishment and that rebuke in that moment. I don't think we should ever punish in anger, but there's got to be an element when we forgive our children,
Yeah, that's good.
and more importantly, we forgive other people's children.
Yep.
Because if we're going to teach our kids to forgive, we so often as parents take issue with one of their friends and something their friends may have done, and then we hold it against that child indefinitely.
Yep. It's like they can never change. That they can never get, yeah.
Now, I'm not saying let your kids
Yeah.
become crackheads because you just let it, you forgave and let them hang out with the wrong crowd. But no, there's an element in which
Yeah.
there's an element in it. If we're going to teach them to forgive, we have to model that with them. And when they're sometimes little jerks, and then we also have to model that with their friends. And I think that's really hard for us because we want to
Yeah.
protect them so desperately. And so if other kids do something wrong, we want to make sure that we don't expose our children to that. But by that very nature, we've taught them that when someone does something wrong, we withdraw from them and we never
We don't-
go
we give 'em-
towards them again.
we don't give them a second chance or whatever.
Right.
And I think also if we keep doing that, you end up with this almost forgetting why you were mad to begin with, and you just have bitterness. You just
Oh.
have that resentment.
Yep.
Yes, I
Yeah.
have dealt with many of those parents of just utter resentment and bitterness. Not just parents, but parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents and Sunday school teachers and like like there's this element where there is a spirit of unforgiveness that
It-
as soon as a child is subjected to that over and over,
Mhm.
they're going to adopt it and they will not learn how to forgive anyone.
Well, even in schools, like there's teachers, like if you're in a small Christian school, like where you're seeing these same teachers every year. If you're one of those kids that got picked out by that teacher to be a nuisance in the classroom,
Yeah,
I've seen, I've
it's
just,
gonna perpetuate.
and then that kid's gonna perceive himself or herself as that person.
So the teachers have a responsibility, pastors have a responsibility,
Yep.
parents, grandparents, but literally we all have the
Yep.
responsibility to
Yes, sir.
teach these children the importance of forgiveness. So, gentlemen, I appreciate the
Yep.
conversation. You can find us at familiesofvirtue.com and our podcast, Virtuous Roots, on all streaming platforms. And we will talk to you next time.